Hi there. We'd like to welcome you to the virtual kitchen table. We are Erin from Everlearning, Hayley from Taking a Kinder Path, and myself, Ashley from Ashley as Mama and Storytime Shelves. We're gathering to have conversations about family life and home education, most specifically unschooling, which is sometimes known as self-directed education, or as I often refer to it, consent-based learning. We'll be sharing experiences and ideas, learning as we go. We hope you'll pull a chair up to the table and join us.
Welcome to the virtual kitchen table. I'm Erin, and I am talking today with Ashley. Hello, Ashley.
Hello.
And Sue Elvis of Stories of an Unschooling Family. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Erin. Hi, Ashley. I'm so excited to be back with you. So thank you for inviting me for this episode.
We're excited to have you back, Sue. And for anyone who is just tuning into this episode and didn't hear the last one, this is actually a continuation. So Sue and I discussed part one for our last episode, and it is a blog post series by Hayley. It's so last time we discussed what is unschooling, part one, and today we're talking about what is unschooling, part two. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about what unschooling looks like. And we didn't have Ashley here last time, so it's nice to have you as part of this today too, Ashley. So yeah.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, and we were just remarking before we started to record that this part two that Hayley has written is very full. Like there is not only a lot of sort of thought and a lot of her own ideas, but she's included a lot of really interesting quotes and links. And yeah, so we're going to see. This might be part one of part two. So we'll see how we do, because there are a lot of, there's lots of interesting things that we could tap into here. So, okay, so let me just look here. So just to recap a little bit, and I would recommend listening to part one if you're just tuning in to this. Part one was an exploration of sort of the framework of unschooling, kind of gave an overview. And today we're talking about what that might actually look like, because I think that is something a lot of people are curious about. They can hear the definition or sort of understand it maybe philosophically, but actually trying to figure out what that might look like day to day is, I think, a question that a lot of people have. So I think this will be interesting because we're three different people. And of course, Hayley was writing from the perspective of how things would be working for her family. So, okay. So she begins with just the question of the series, which is what is unschooling? So maybe we can circle back to that a little bit to begin with. I'll just read what she's put here as a definition, and then we can talk a little bit further from there. So Hayley says, unschooling is a way of living and learning with our children and looking at the world, inspired by a set of common ideas. And then she goes on to list, 6 common ideas. Learning happens naturally. Learning happens all the time. Learning is personal. Coercion creates resistance. Delight and purpose drive learning, and trusting children. So there could be like a discussion about each one of those, couldn't there? So she goes on to say, many families learn about unschooling while exploring alternatives to school. No wonder then that unschooling is mostly seen as a kind of homeschooling. Yet unschooling is so much more than that. Okay, so before we even talk about that, I just thought I would check in with, with both of you, if you have any thoughts coming up, or whether you have a favorite definition of unschooling. Sue, you've written so much about unschooling. If someone was to ask you to define it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, you can say no, you can say no. But if someone was to say to you, Sue, do you have like a definition?
Well, I don't like, there's something wrong with all the definitions. as we're going to get into, it's not really child-led learning. They all have something missing from them. I guess closest would be natural learning or learning from life. But if I was describing unschooling to somebody, I think that I would take a leaf out of Sandra Dodd's book, because I learnt this from her in over the last year, is to tell a story about learning, illustrate it so it's concrete and how it works in real life, and then just have a little story and then go from there if there's any more questions and where that leads. But rooting it in an actual story rather than a definition, which is inadequate, I think, to describe it. Because I think that when we're talking about unschooling, a lot of times it just does not pick up the delight of this way of life. When you get down to definitions and maybe how do you homeschool, how you do homeschool registration as an unschooler, it really takes all the delight of our lives away. We can't convey that, but we can convey unschooling from a personal story, I think, and our delight coming through our words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it I think too that sometimes it's almost easier to illustrate to somebody how it looks as an adult, right? Like to help them think about something that they're pursuing, either because they need to or because they have an interest in it. There's something about when it gets attached to children that people kind of get all befuddled, that there's no way this could work, and we have to have, people aren't taking the responsibility seriously or something like that. But really, it's how we all learn once we're outside of the school system. Sure, we might choose a path that's a little bit schoolier, but again, that's our own choice. So I find that helpful sometimes too, is to kind of look at what does it look like for us and for that person, that we might be in a conversation with, because it's not actually so far away from very similar process, isn't it?
Do you sometimes think, Erin, that parents are unschooling themselves without realizing that that's what they're doing, but they're looking for a homeschooling method for their children? So they're a great example of unschooling. I always remember years ago somebody that was telling me how to do a screen, one of these videos where you share your screen. I can't remember what they're called, but I was talking about Evernote, and I wanted to talk and show people what I was doing. And so this homeschooler described how to do it, and she taught me, and she taught me, Sandra wouldn't like those words. I learnt from her because learning is active. It's not a passive, you can't fill somebody up. But, and I thought afterwards, wow, you're teaching yourself so much. You have so much knowledge. You're going here, there, and everywhere, gathering information, the information that you need to have a successful blog, YouTube channel. You're unschooling. But I didn't tell her that. And she was doing it all, I guess, to help other parents homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, well, I was just going to say that's such a good way of thinking about it too, is just if we're able to find a way to point out how that person themselves might be doing unschooling without realizing it. Because I think you're right, it's very much the same thing. The other thing I think about, because like you said, I think it was you, Erin, who said it seems to be different when we start talking about kids. Which you can understand because school's just so embedded in everyday life for so many people. But I do like to go back to mention what it's like when children are really young before their school age, and how all the learning that's happening during that time. There's so many examples that you could use where it's just through life. And it's kind of like continuing that on once they become school age. Because I think you're right, Sue. It really is hard. It's almost like if you wanted to really understand someone else's family life, like what it's really like just to be in someone else's family and what their day-to-day looks like. It would take a while for you to explain that, describe that, because, and as we'll get into with this post, everyone's family is so different and unique. That's kind of what we're talking about, because unschooling is just life without school. I mean, it's so much more than that. But do you know what I mean? Like we have an idea of like families that we get to know really well, kind of what their day to day might look like, but we don't really know unless we're living it right along with them. So I think sometimes that's why it's tricky, because it really is so unique to every family, because it's them doing life, but without school.
Mhm.
That's why I really love Hayley's article. I read a book, I don't know, a long, long, long time ago, and about unschooling. And the author of this chapter wrote about her day, and I thought, but that feels foreign to me. I don't see us doing what you're doing. What am I supposed to do? I can't model myself on your day because we don't roller skate, we don't do this, we don't do that. We're interested in this and this. But from Hayley's article, she's not saying that. She's not giving us a blueprint for how we should go through our days, which homeschooling methods do. Charlotte Mason, we're told you do these lessons and you should do this many of this lesson and they should be this length. And you've got to cover this topic and this topic and this topic. But what I think is more important is, why do we do what we do? And so when we're telling our personal story, I was so excited because we saw these butterflies the other day, and there were many, many more of them than we've ever seen before. And so we started asking questions about it, and then the story continues and it illustrates, and we can maybe point out a few principles about how delighted we are to learn and how curious. That's sort of the basis of what we're doing. And it doesn't matter if you're curious about butterflies or curious about cricket scores or baseball scores or whatever. It's the same principles. And so what we're discussing today is things that are common to everybody, regardless of what your day looks like. My day doesn't look like yours, Erin, and it doesn't look like yours, Ashley. But we have so many. The framework is there. We're talking here. If our days didn't have anything in common, we'd just be sitting here. But we're not. We're excited. We recognize that we're doing things for a particular reason, things that we believe are part of life, part of how people learn. And so it's relevant to everybody, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think, Ashley, I think that I think we recorded an episode, I think, and it was maybe it was like Unschooling, What's in a Name, or was that, I know I wrote a blog post about that, and I thought we maybe recorded an episode about it. If not, I'll link the blog post, but it just draws me back to what Sue said at the beginning, that any term that we come up with is going to have something that is incomplete, right? Because yeah, it's just such a it's not this tidy, Sue, you mentioned Charlotte Mason, and I actually wouldn't mind just talking about that for a minute. I think you were talking about like the length. I don't know if it was the length of lessons or the length, because Charlotte Mason talks about, I think, doing these fairly like kind of short, concise. And, I think you can look at a lot of homeschool methods or homeschool philosophies, and you can see where some of it came from. Like, I think the intention was to be quite child-centered, and okay, well, a child's, rather than drawing out and expecting this of children, let's work with the way that she was observing anyway, that kids' attention spans usually worked. But Sue, I feel like you and I have had this conversation somewhere before that, like when you're in tune with your child, you're not going to drag, if you don't need to limit yourself to saying, okay, my child is 7, so we're just going to do a short piece on this, because that's so different than what's happening, isn't it? Like, you're engaging in something, you're talking about something, and if you notice that your child is losing focus, well, they're either going to move on to something else, or you would naturally realize that and kind of move on in a different way. And I think that's the difference between the idea of a method. What am I trying to say here? Like, with a method where you're presenting it versus just living life. We don't have to think about, if we're having a conversation about something or we're reading a story, it's just part of our day. We're not thinking, okay, well, this is this morning's lesson, so I'm going to keep it short because my kids are young. It's just, I'm not quite explaining myself, but it's not so curated or presented. It's just part of what's happening. So you don't have to worry about the length, because if kids are not maintaining attention, then they're going to move on.
Yeah, there's a quote right at the beginning that I'll just read because it's short, that what you're talking about, I think it's what that made me think of the quote in the post. So it says the goal, it's right under, I'm not jumping ahead too much. It's right under is
it's right
unschooling
there.
a method of, So it says the goal of unschooling is not education. It is to help a child be who she is and blossom into who she will become. Learning happens as a side effect. I really love that.
That's a Joyce Federal quote.
Yeah. Right? Which I don't think I'd come across anywhere else but this post of Hayley's. But I think, like, as you were talking, like, that came to mind, that learning happens as a side effect of just what we're doing, living life together, rather than, I think what you were describing, right, is kind of like a little bit of planning and like, this is what we're going to focus on for this amount of time. That's not where the focus is. The focus is being with our kids and doing things with them. And then learning happens as a side effect. And of course it's, trusting that that's happening and all of that stuff too.
Did you have anything on that, Sue? Or
well, I was just thinking about, I've tried Charlotte Mason many years ago because I tried everything. And whether my insights are correct or not, I think that kids are capable of focusing on something for a lot longer than a short lesson.
Yeah.
They don't have a problem. We don't necessarily have to give them lessons anyway. But I wonder sometimes if the short lesson is more to do with, oh, look, you only have to do 20 minutes of maths and then you can move on. You only have to do half an hour of reading with me and then you can move on. Whether it's the way of almost bribing kids that we're only going to do a little bit of it. And that is sort of sad, isn't it? That I think it speaks to a parent's doubts and that kids are going to learn without their input. But kids are so capable of learning and focusing. It's just quite often they're not interested in whatever we want to present to them. That's the problem. But with life, there's so many interesting things to be curious about, isn't there? They're not going, I think sometimes, I do this as well, when you're limited, just say you have to go out or it's dinner time and you think, no, I don't want to stop, or it's bedtime and you have to stop because if you don't stop now, oh, well, if I don't stop, I'll be up all night thinking about it. So I've got to put it away. But that delicious feeling of being so immersed in learning, it's not a chore. It's not a lesson. It's just pure delight. And that's what I think kids are capable of. That's what drives them. And that we don't have to take the reins and ensure that they're learning. They'll do it by themselves if we give them step back. Well, I say step back. But then again, that is, you can always say something that's not quite right, isn't it? We don't want to step completely back. We want to be involved and be learning too. So yeah, that's all I had to say. So keep reading or whatever, because I could go on for hours.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that you added to that, Sue, because I think just the last thing I'll say about that Charlotte Mason piece. So two of Hayley's points here, when she's defining unschooling. So coercion creates, actually, all of them probably, but now there's a third one standing out. Learning is personal. Coercion creates resistance, and delight and purpose drive learning. And so again, I think with methods, with homeschool methods, it might involve presenting something that's parent-led to the child, right? This is a read aloud we should do. Or this is a science, this is information you should learn. And so I agree with you, Sue. I think that the attention span that kids have can be very, very, not only can it be long, it can be very intense and very deep when it's personal to them, when it's relevant to them, and not something that's just on a list, kind of a box to tick off. We talked about metamorphosis or something like that. And, when it's really relevant to them in that moment, the learning can be really very, very deep. And I think there's another piece actually now that's coming to me about this too, is what we perceive as attention. So I think it's become more common knowledge that sometimes, even when it seems like a child has lost focus, let's say they're fidgeting with something, or they're zooming a car at the same time, or their body's moving, often they are still taking in lots of information. So that's the other piece, is that what do we mean by that about their attention span, that they can only sit perfectly still and listen? Or if we're reading a book and they're immersed in it, even a book that a child absolutely loves, they're not necessarily just going to sit perfectly forward and, look to make eye contact with you. They might be, people's brains work so differently.
We actually learn better when we're moving.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading something about that. And so I always do something while I'm listening to an audio talk or a podcast or something. Yeah, but talking about media, one of the biggest problems that society talks about is attention span. And we're all talking about how the internet, how social media has broken our attention span. We want things in small bites. We scroll. We're not interested in reading anymore. And if we're reading, our minds wander. But I wonder if it all starts in childhood rather than it starts on the internet. It starts with us interrupting our kids all the time so they don't ever experience the pure joy of being immersed in something. They're always being interrupted. Even at school, bells go, and kids are probably glad, that lesson's over. But when we sit all morning with one book because a child has said, please read another chapter, Mum, we're there. That is such a valuable experience, not just what they're taking in, but for their focus, their are being allowed to immerse themselves for a long period of time, and they'll hopefully later on won't have the same problems that many people have like me who couldn't listen for a long time. I had to retrain myself to sit and listen without thinking, oh, I want to go and make a cup of coffee, or and then find out that I've missed half of what was said because I wasn't concentrating, because I found it too difficult. My mind just wouldn't stay with it. I'm a lot better now, but I just wonder, what problems are we setting up for our kids later on by continually interrupting?
Yeah, I've actually I just want to comment on that quickly because I was thinking about it recently when I noticed that when we have days like that, where when, we end up reading our story for much longer because we're really into it and we don't want to put it down, or maybe we stay out a lot longer on a hike or something than planned. And I look back at what we did that day and it feels like we only did that one thing, or maybe that thing and like one other thing, and how quick my mind could go to, I guess, kind of feeling like we didn't do enough, or like, how is that all we did for the whole day, as if that there's something wrong with that. which of course there's not. And I think I agree with you so much, Sue, that I think that like that's where I have to go back and do work myself and recognize that that's actually really valuable, because then we are staying immersed and focused and engaged in what's really interesting to us that day, rather than, me getting caught up on, well, we should probably do some other things as well. Why, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's making me think about how a few years ago I wrote some a day in the life posts, but it was there were there were different homeschool families writing them, and how tricky I found it, because a lot of there were various, I guess what you would call homeschool styles or methodologies, but I felt very out of place or odd in the way that I was writing, because I think for other people, what I noticed is it was like the what. So we did a read aloud from this time to this time, and then we went outside to play, and then we came in and maybe we worked on a unit study about something, and then we had lunch, and so it was very much, that kind of is the point of a day in the life, is to kind of give this incremental, morning, either till late afternoon or till evening. But what I found for myself, kind of like what both of you are saying, sometimes it was a day that was quite full of different things, but it might be more like you're describing, where it could be, you just get really into a story, or you do have a day where you're hiking. And what was coming to mind for me were all the details that I was noticing within that. Things I was noticing on the hike, things I noticed about my kids, things we came across. So instead of saying like, and I'm kind of making this up, I'm not sure whether a hike was part of my writing, but just as an example, instead of saying like, we went for a hike and maybe like 2 sentences about it, that was actually where the things I was like the learning was all within that hike, rather than just stating we did this and we did that and we did the next thing. And some of it wasn't even learning, like to the point of this quote from Joyce Federal. It was actually, I do remember one of them because it was a winter one, and my daughter and I, we did go on like a sort of a winter walk. I don't know if it was really hike level, but it was a walk. And we got to the forest, and just the way the snow had fallen and the way the sun was coming in, we both just gasped. Like, it was just, I still just can't believe how majestic. I've never experienced that quite that way before. And so much of that was kind of like this feeling, almost this like shared magic that we were experiencing. It really was a feeling, rather than, and then we learned about this, and then we learned about that. And so it's just, anyway, that's what that brought up for me, is I remember just having such a hard time figuring out how to write this in a way that was relatable to anybody, because I was focusing more on like relationship and just kind of the glimmers that we were seeing than I was on. I think I still tried to draw the other stuff in, but it wasn't really like where my real heart was. And I was like, well, I must sound really airy fairy, but it's just such a different, the focus is in a completely different place, right? And it's not about getting it done. It's not about looking at how many things you did during the day. Although if you were to break it down, you did so much, like so many things happened, but they're often within the same quote activity. Like,
yeah, you're making me think. I know exactly what you mean, and it's also making me think about I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like the conversations that we have, it's not like sometimes I might think of something that I want to talk about with the kids ahead of time. It's not that I never do that, but most of the time it just, of course, we're out doing something or we're at home doing something, and a conversation gets started naturally. And, we can really get into things sometimes, and it would be almost odd to try to describe that or explain that to someone else. But when I really take time to think about like what all took place during like that conversation that we had, there's so much there. And that's like in all weave throughout all of our days together. And you're right about like it's not like checking it off, right? Like it's yeah, it's just part of it, but it's a big part of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Earlier I said something about you can't change turn the wonderful delightfulness of unschooling uh, into words sometimes that it can't be explained. But when people are setting out, it does, I think, help to do what you've just done, Erin, to take that one, I didn't do much today, and to examine what exactly went on, what learning happened, even if it's just an exercise a couple of times, or perhaps it's needed for homeschool record keeping because some people don't have the luxury of not thinking about that. We had to do that. And so for a few weeks, I think it was, I took some situations that were common ones, like going on an outing. And I broke down all the learning afterwards that had occurred during that outing. Now, I didn't go to my kids and say, look what you learned today. You learned this, this, and this. It was purely for a blog post and then to take all that and put it in my records so that somebody from the outside who doesn't understand unschooling can see that my kids, they got exposed to a lot of learning today. Not that it's important for us, but it's important for them because without their approval, we wouldn't have been able to unschool. And it was just, I don't know, overwhelming, I suppose, the amount of learning that we don't even recognize, that we just don't notice. It's just part of life. And each day is so rich depending on, regardless of what you do, whether you did 10 things, whether you did one thing, whether like yesterday, I had a bad day yesterday. I had a headache all day and it was a nothing day. And at the end, I thought, I have done nothing today because my head hurt all day. And then I thought about it this morning while I was reading Hayley's article before we began talking, and I thought that's not quite true. I took our dogs for a walk because I thought the fresh air might clear my head and they needed a walk. And I saw some fungi while I was out, this new lot that have come up, which is yellow. The other day there was some red fungi that came up, and it belongs to the same family as is it called death cap mushroom? And it's poisonous. And between the red fungi coming up the other day and yesterday, somebody had come along, either an animal or a person, and had pulled it all up, and it was all over the place. And I thought to myself, well, I hope they realize that that's poisonous and haven't eaten it. They didn't let a dog eat it. And there were other things. Oh, somebody had dumped some car parts in the bush, which isn't good, but it was a perfect photo opportunity. I got this really cool photo that looks like a robot down in the bush. I got down as best I could with two dogs, holding on to two dogs, and took this photo. But there were other things in my day. I watched MasterChef in the afternoon because that's all I had the energy for. And MasterChef is just so rich with learning experiences. I went Googling French cookery because I thought, what would I do if the challenge was to do some classical French, cook a classical French dish? And I thought, oh, look, I'll be lost. So I thought I better do some Googling in case I ever find myself in this situation. And what are they going to cook? And then I was looking at the French language because I've done a bit of French. And you, Aaron, you speak French. And I was thinking, and you probably do too, Ashley. And I was thinking, do I remember much French? And all these learning experiences on a day when my head ached so much that I told everybody I did nothing today. And so, yeah, just remarkable. I don't know why I was telling you all that. Probably because I was talking about how there's so much learning hidden in our days that we don't even acknowledge. And that sometimes it can be a good exercise to sit down with pencil or paper with our notes app and just list it all and think, wow, yes, my kids are learning. And it's reassuring at certain stages of our unschooling life to have that reassurance that just because somebody else tells you that, kids learn all the time. Sometimes we need to see it for ourselves and not just trust them. We need to be able to see that. And also that learning, Erin, that you talked about that sense of awe and wonder and the connections we make with nature, other experiences, but with each other, sharing that. How do we put that into words? But it's, I think, looking back, that those moments when you get to the, I say to get to the end of having your kids with you, they're the ones that mean the most. They're the ones that you think, oh, if I hadn't have had this, if I had made my kids do this, this, and this, and we'd missed that, how sad I would be. And I've got a very good example of that. Uh, when Gemma, I think it was Gemma Rose was a baby in arms. It snowed, and we rarely have snow. We had so much snow, it covered the ground. We got up in the morning, we looked out, it was white. And my kids wanted to go out and play, but we were due to go to lunch somewhere. And I wouldn't let them go out and I wouldn't let them play and get dirty because we had to leave home at a particular time. And it's one of my big regrets that I didn't let them out the door and just took them to the lunch dirty. Uh, it just, my priorities were wrong. And we haven't had snow like that since. And it's sad that my memory is of it. I feel negative about it instead of that awe that you feel about when you were talking about Erin, and how we can welcome those experiences into our lives, or we can shut them out.
Mhm.
And which ones will we feel were the most important when we get to the end? And those experiences with our children, well, we hope we're going to be in contact with our children, but when they're not in the same situation, not living within our families anymore, and we can't do that.
Yeah, I know when we kind of started, like it took me some time to kind of grow my confidence in those moments, to let those moments be enough, because for a while it felt like we had to do more than just having that moment. Like today, for example, we were on the beach and my one kiddo found a snail. And my other kiddo ended up really like so the one kiddo brought over the snail and spent like a not even 2 full minutes with us with the snail and kind of went off and did their own thing. But my other kiddo really started watching the snail. It came out of the shell and was moving around and just really interested in what the snail was doing. And I think my husband even made a comment like what a homeschooler, which what he really meant was what an unschooler, but I didn't correct him. And yeah, it was, I think years ago, if that had happened, I mean, not that many years ago, a while back, I would have grabbed on to that a bit more and asked more, like almost, I mean, I never went too crazy in these moments, but I think I would, like, I didn't even think about it again until right now. Whereas before, I think I would have thought, oh, we're interested in snails. Oh, well, what, like a little bit more. And I hear other people talk about that, like, oh, well, hop onto that interest and, what can we build on it? And also, like, maybe worried about what should we make, because I know other people ask, like, well, how do I know what they're remembering? Almost like, do we quiz afterwards, right? Like getting caught up in this idea of like, but will they remember this? How do I drill it in? Like, how do I make sure they remember it? Which now, like, that just doesn't cross my mind anymore at all. Like, the moment was just the moment. But that took me some time to, yeah, to realize that we don't need to go home and do a project. We don't need to, like that moment can just whatever we got out of that moment. And I mean, I didn't even see it as, it's easy for me now to think back, well, we noticed this about the snail and we probably learned that, but I don't even, and I am fortunate I don't have to do any kind of reporting. If I did, I'd probably have that on my mind a little bit more. But now I can just, after the confidence of doing this for so long now, or long enough, I guess, that I don't have those, I guess it's more schoolish mindset and worries around, um, not just trusting that the learning is happening, but did we do enough with that opportunity? And will they remember it?
I think from what you're saying, Ashley, it just makes me feel that we get to the stage where we are comfortable, but we can't forget that not everybody is there, that it's a very difficult task raising our kids, and as Joyce said, about letting them be who they are, but become who they will be. It's not easy, and it involves a lot of doubts, a lot of worry, concern, and we people don't just pop in where we are.
Mhm.
That and say, well, in some ways it's interesting, well, necessary to talk about how we got there. And even on when we're here, it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't look back and doubt yourself. You have a day when you think, really, did we take the right pathway? And then you sit down and think about it and think about the alternatives, and you think, of course we did. But it doesn't stop. It's not like you've passed the test now, and life will be so, no doubts whatsoever. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of say that we have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have the doubts, and it's okay to need the reassurance that kids are learning, because that's how we learn. We learn about it and we observe. And then one day, as you say, you're watching a child with a snail and you don't think anything. Well, you think that snail's interesting, and maybe you think, this is such a lovely moment for my child. You're sitting here on this beautiful morning at the beach, but don't think in terms of, all right, now we'll go home and we'll do a quiz. And maybe I'll get my child to write about the experience so they don't forget it. Yes, that spoils it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and instead I just, without thinking, I got off the log that I was sitting on next to my husband, and I grabbed my camera and I started recording. We started talking about it. Like, it was definitely just a moment together, which I think is what it's all about. But yeah, it took me some time for sure to get there. And absolutely, I still have moments where I have those doubts and worries. And that's when I often find myself opening up one of your blogs or Hayley's blog and rereading and being like, right, okay, it's like finding support in that way in those moments when it does happen. But they happen less and less, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just the longer you do it, have those experiences. Like you said, Sue, we're always learning.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, Sue, your reminder about that, about people being at different places. I'm going to come back to that because I think it actually segues into something that might be nice to dip back into Hayley's wording. But before I do that, I just wanted to this experience with the snail, Ashley. I was thinking, like, what a nice thing for your child to be able to just very naturally notice something and be interested in it without like coming home to a unit study being planned, or, because we can just rob kids of what are just very simple moments by turning things into more than they need to be. The other thing I was thinking about that, especially when you said you got it from the log and you were kind of videotaping it, I feel like within unschooling, there's this possibility of like a middle ground, because on the one hand, you could have done what you might have done earlier in your homeschool journey, which is, okay, let's make this a teachable moment. Let's go to the library and get books out about snails, and just turned it into something more than he needed it to be. But the flip of that, I think, are parents that aren't really engaged at all in their child's interest and might have been like, oh yeah, that's nice. But the fact that you were also sharing in that learning, and I mean, listen, we can't do that all the time. Like, it's not like we're always doing that. But I think, and this is where and I think when we get to part 3, Hayley has talked about myths of unschooling. But one of those myths is that it's just this completely hands-off, laid back. And it's not. Like, that encouragement and that support is there, but it's not there to check a box off, and it's not there to cram as much of an experience as possible into a kid in that moment. It's there because it's genuinely interesting, and what your kids are into, are interesting on their own, but it's also interesting to us to have our kids share an interest. So it's from the point of view of curiosity and relationship, not performance. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you added that bit at the end, that no, you didn't turn it into a quiz or anything like that, but you also noticed it and mm-hmm. enjoyed it with him. And some kids don't even like that. And so you would be in tune with your child, so you'd back up, right? But you probably had a sense that he would like that moment. Or he'd at least be okay with it, because you're probably interested too.
Yeah. And to add to that too, some kids, like your kids will let you know, like my kids let me know when they do want more. Yeah. Right. So like, I've talked about my one kiddo who's really into dog breeds. So we did a whole bunch. We didn't do a unit study specifically, but we probably could have. So it's not to like, that's maybe where the child-led wording can come in sometimes, where, your kids will let you know often or anytime that, if my kiddo today kept talking about snails and said, can we look this up and can we do that? Right. That did not happen at all today with the snail. But with other things, it certainly does. So sometimes you do go down that road, but it's because the curiosity is there and they're asking for it. And you're, like you said, you're in tune to them. So you kind of know, and you play it by ear. It's not something that you can really plan ahead.
Well, how about our own curiosity, that can play a part in the moment as well? We don't want to impart more information or ask questions necessarily to expand our children's knowledge, but we want to share our curiosity. So, for example, we went once to, many times, but one particular time, we went to this nature reserve on the edge of a river. And when I got home, I was curious about this nature reserve. Where did it come from? How long had it been there? And so I looked it up and discovered that there used to be kangaroos in the nature reserve. There was a fence up, a kangaroo fence. They put a kangaroo fence up, and this is what had sparked my curiosity. When did that fence go up? Are there still kangaroos here? And well, there wasn't, because they moved the kangaroos during a really wet season when they thought that the river was going to flood and the kangaroos would have been, they would have gone under. So they relocated them, and that involved a lot of problems, because you can't just relocate these kangaroos into another area with different kangaroos. They're different families, maybe. Anyway, it caught my attention. I was so curious about it, and just spontaneously over the dinner table, I imparted some of this knowledge and just said, guess what I found out about the nature reserve? And my kids were interested, and they picked up on it, and we had a good discussion. And then I said to them, if you want to read more, I'll put a link in our homeschool records book, and you can go follow, you can go and read what I've read. But it was an invitation, but it wasn't necessary. It just, if, like we're talking today, we've got all these links in this article, we want to know more. So we'll follow some of them and expand our knowledge. And so I gave my kids that opportunity to share in what I discovered, but they didn't have to if they didn't want to. It was my curiosity, my question. But sometimes that bubbles over, and we know it when our kids are really interested in something. Our eyes light up. When someone's passionate about something, it's infectious, contagious. They present it to us, maybe something that we've never thought interesting before, but we see it in a new way because of the passion that our kids are sharing. They're noticing different things that we never noticed, and we get carried along on that wave of learning. So talking about not stepping back, I think it is okay to offer more information. It's just the way we do it, and not to worry about whether they don't follow up at all. And maybe the reason that we're giving them the invitation is out of our curiosity and our spark, not because we're worried that they should learn more about this. This is a teachable moment. It's just sharing what we've learnt. And that is a good example, isn't it? That our example of learning is very important for our kids. That just when we're really curious and delighted and standing there in awe, our kids pick up on that. It's learning is so enjoyable. It's not what we were brought up to believe going through the school system.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm thinking too, Sue, with you and I both having adult children, and of course being adults ourselves who are not like we don't necessarily have to be thinking about unschooling or homeschooling or any kind of schooling at this point, but how much like when you're speaking, like there's so much joy and wonder in the way, in the tone in your voice and the things that you're saying. And I get that because it's almost like now that I'm at the stage that I'm at, I almost want to talk about it more because it almost frees you up to really, really see the possibilities for what they are, whether it's the kind of relationship, whether it's curiosity and learning, just this idea of like living life and with curiosity, with connection. It's somewhat unburdened when you kind of, I guess, quote, move to the other side, isn't it? That you can really just, I mean, you don't have to worry about, I think you always enjoyed an element of homeschool records from what you've described, but you don't even have to think about that anymore. And I just find too, there's just so many things. I've been having so much trouble lately, like kind of writing about things that I think would be interesting to people because I'm just so excited about like things, you know, like we have a mourning dove nest in the backyard. Like I just want to learn, and like I've been observing, and then I'm looking to see, you know, how many days would the incubation be, and each time we go out there's this like 5 or 6 other mourning doves who kind of fly. So I'm like, do they have a protective do they have like a guard system? What's going on? And I'm so interested in actually finding out that I kind of sometimes get tired of talking about the process of it because there's so many cool things just to explore. Like some of the things that you have talked about on the ladies podcast, there's been a couple episodes at least where I think topics like poetry have come up or Shakespeare. And I just want to hear that. And not that I don't like the rest of the episode, but I'm just at that point where I love hearing that digging deeper. And so I guess I just want to say that because I feel like this really is a lifelong, I mean, I'm often talking about it, calling it whole life learning, not just whole as far as the time period, but just all of it, right? And I don't know, there's something about having kids that have completely moved past any legal responsibility with the school system that just frees you up to like observe the mourning doves.
I look forward to that.
I am glad to be free of homeschool record keeping, but I think that with anything that you have to do, you have to find a way that is enjoyable, that you get something out of it, and that's what I did creatively. But the other thing I was thinking about your mourning doves, Erin, is
Yeah.
that you shared that story in our community, and you probably shared it on Instagram. I'm not, I don't look at Instagram, but if that was your children, you would have, I mean, you probably shared it with your family, but
Yes.
we shouldn't be afraid to share stuff like that with our children, step completely back and say, oh no, I can't influence, they won't want to hear this. Uh, it's a natural thing to do to share things that delight us, so that we're curious about. We could take over the conversation, of course, but it usually starts a conversation. You look at the community where you post something like that, and then everybody comes along and says, "Oh, wow, yes," and they find their own way into it and share
Yeah.
something that's relevant to them. Not just we just read it and think, "All right, that's Erin." We think, "Oh, I know."
It
I'll,
reminds you of
I'll say,
something.
well, oh, I've never seen a mourning dove, but the other day, and knowing you love birds, I will tell you about the magpie that sat on the picnic table while we were having breakfast and how beautiful the song was, and how such an ordinary bird, very common bird, has such a unique voice. These things are worth. That's just a subjective fact. I think that maybe somebody else wouldn't. But that just sharing something starts the conversation, and we all can be part of it, and it comes alive for everybody, and that includes our children. That if we treat them like kids, and this is a lesson, no, treat them like people that we're living life with,
Mhm.
and that we were interested in what sparks them. Of course, they're interested in what sparks us. Where this is a joint experience.
I think about the term narration, which sounds a bit formal, but like Pam Laricchia and Anna Brown talk about that, like narrating, when we're interested in something or we've noticed something or we've made an observation, just mentioning it, talking about it, sharing it, right? I knew about the mourning dove nest because my husband saw it and took a picture to send to me because he knew I would want to see it. And that's how that happens, because we share our interests, right? And then somebody else goes, oh, Erin would love this, or Mom would love this. I actually had somebody that I work with the other day send me a message with a picture of a bird's nest. And they said to me, we were, cleaning out the front yard. We found this bird's nest. We wondered if you and your daughter would like it. And I'm thinking, I wonder how they know. They must have heard me mention birds, I guess. But I didn't think I'd really been talking about birds, but I must have mentioned my daughter. And so it goes even beyond our family. Like, it can be really contagious, I think, when we are interested in what other people are pursuing and they're taking an interest in us. And we mention a little bit about what we're interested in. So it's really not just, to confine it to this sort of homeschool methodology seems so like it cheapens it, kind of, right? But on that note, I want to, before we,
I've just looked ahead, and I think, because I was thinking, oh, look, we have hardly started as far as the article goes.
covered some
But I
stuff.
think that we have anticipated very well what Hayley was talking about.
Yeah.
She goes, exploring interests, following joy, parents as partners. I think that if you, it would be good for you to read some of that, Erin, but I think that we've naturally gone in that direction because it makes sense.
Yes, exactly. No, it does. And I think we're all relating to a lot of the same, even though we're different families, we're all relating to a lot of the same, I guess, principles, but just things, the things that happen. But the piece I did want to jog back to, and this is just like the very literal part of my brain, because I think when people are coming, like Sue, I appreciated you mentioning that, it's good to remember that, we can get carried away and talk about things, but people hear things relative to where they are, relative to how new the information is, relative to how open they are to making changes to begin with. And so I want to just read a little bit about what Hayley put. So she has her question here, is unschooling a method of homeschooling? And then she gives the Joyce Federal quote that Ashley read, which is, the goal of unschooling is not education. It's to help a child be who she is and blossom into who she'll become. Learning happens as a side effect. And that's a Joyce Federal quote. And then Hayley goes on to say, for me, this quote gets to the heart of unschooling. And then she says, but I hear you, not education. What's the deal with that? Is unschooling about supporting our children's learning or not? And then she says, okay, the short answer is yes and no. It depends. And then she goes on to say, those two little words, a common frustration for anyone attempting to get to grips with unschooling, but also the essence of its beauty. Okay, so I just want to, I also love that Joyce Federal quote, and it's so true that learning happens as a side effect of joy, of exploring, all of those things. But I think back to this idea, like for me, I'm not always comfortable deciding what the definition of unschooling is. So I think that for some people, and maybe it's at the beginning of their journey, but maybe it continues. For some people, they might really think of unschooling as education, and I think it can be. I think we're talking about it in a certain vein, but that's not to say that people, maybe it depends on where you live and whether your child has to do testing or record keeping or whatever, or maybe it's just kind of where you are at in your process. But I do think that for some people more than others, they do have the educational end of things in mind. And I do still think that can be unschooling. I think if they are coming at it from a curiosity perspective, from a joy perspective, it might be a better fit for them. I think it might be too much for some people to say, no, we're just living our lives and learning happens. And it's kind of like two things can be true at the same time. So I completely agree with Joyce. And at the same time, I appreciate the fact that Hayley kind of says yes and no, right? Or as she put it, it depends. And I'll just read a little bit more of Hayley's words here. The child is at the heart of unschooling. And so the questions we ask and the answers we seek are likely to be as individual as them. That's kind of the point of unschooling. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And then she says, unschoolers are passionate about learning. Just look at that framework of ideas, bursting with references to learning. You might even wonder if learning's all we think about. Yet learning occurs as a natural consequence of living. Learning doesn't need a special box to live in, special time set aside, or special materials. Learning, as Joyce says, happens as a side effect of living a full and rich life with our children. Learning is woven into the fabric of our lives, and it's happening all the time. So, yeah, I love Hayley's words there too. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle back to that from as I said, a literal perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that, either of you, or have we dug into that one enough?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, okay.
I did have thoughts, but it's kind of what we've already touched on. I mean,
Yeah.
Hayley just has put it so well, so I think we're probably okay to just keep going.
Sounds good. Okay. Okay, so this just kind of taps into, and as you said, Sue, I think we've certainly said some of these pieces. So we'll just see if there's anything else here that this brings up. Her next heading here is what unschooling looks like. Of course, unschooling looks different in every family. We've all got our own unique circumstances, personalities, and preferences. Yet, despite all these differences, there are some common threads that bind all unschooling families together, similarities in how we live our lives. And it's these threads that we'll be looking at in this post. And it's funny because just the fact that we were coming up with so many common ideas, you can see that there are definitely some common principles. So one of them, she talks about learning from life. Unschooling is also referred to as natural or life learning, delight-driven, or interest-led. Oh gosh, there's so much good stuff here. I'm trying to think of where to. Okay, so exploring their interests.
Can I say something at that point?
Yeah.
It's the next bit, if I'm keeping pace with you, is about describing your favorite Saturdays, like a day in the summer filled with, all that. It makes it sound so beautiful. And I think we have been describing unschooling as delight-filled days, but there are difficult days. And we haven't mentioned that just because you get up in the morning and everything falls apart and it's difficult, that's life. It's not unschooling. And so unrealistic expectations that every single day of our unschooling life will feel like a beautiful Saturday in summer when we can do whatever we like. It's not that way. We do have difficult days. And the other thing I am similar there is, well, I guess it's part of natural learning that our kids and us, we also learn things that are difficult and that we don't want to learn. It's not all about only doing the things that we like. And naturally in life that we come across things that have to be learnt regardless of whether we want to. So, but we don't, as Charlotte Mason would say, let's drill our kids in this. It's not very interesting, so we'll do a 20-minute lesson every day for so many weeks until we've covered it. We and our kids, the motivation for doing it, this is going to be difficult. I don't like this, but I choose to do it. And I think that is relevant for kids as well. I think that's just an aside, Erin. I think that's not relevant to the next part, but I sort of thought that sometimes people can read about unschooling and it's difficult, and they think it's not difficult for them. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
And it's almost like unschooling is sounds like a fairy tale life. Oh, look, why wouldn't we want to live like that? And in reality, a lot of it is like that, and you feel grateful and filled with delight. But it's also difficult sometimes. And you just get on up and you just keep on doing it because it's what our kids need us to do. And we all experience it because of life learning. We learn that life is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I gave the example of finding that snail on the beach today, which probably sounds, oh, that's lovely. And we did have that moment and some nice moments to the day. But for the same kiddo who was interested in the snail, this afternoon had a really rough afternoon that lasted all afternoon and said the beach was boring. I didn't even want to actually said the beach was torture. And just had a day and has been having many days, if I'm being honest, and I think is kind of just going through something right now. So as you were talking to it, I think I think you're so right. It's important to mention that it's not all, easy breezy all the time, and it is real life, and there's can be many challenging days and challenging moments. And then the other piece that made me think of too, because I've heard this where people will say, if you're questioning unschooling and if this is working or however they might put it, just look at your child. If your child's thriving and if your child's happy, your child's doing well, that's a sign that it's working, which I'm not saying I disagree with that, but I know I've heard that at times, and both my kids have gone through, I don't know if it's phases or stretches of times or periods where I could look at them, and I don't mean just in one day, right? But like over maybe a few months or even longer sometimes, where I could have looked at them and gone, well, if that's the case, unschooling must not be working because they don't look like they're thriving right now. And then you can kind of easily get to maybe it's because we're unschooling. Maybe it's because we're not doing this or because they're not going to school. And that could be the case sometimes, that they do need something different. But yeah, I think it's kind of my point being that, a kid can be going through a bit of a particular tough time, and that's kind of just part of it. So no matter what you were doing or where they were, they could still be having a tough time. So I agree with you. It's important to, we maybe don't want to always share specific examples of our kids having a tough time or challenging moments that we've had, because that's kind of maybe sharing too much of their personal stuff, but just to mention that it's not always easy breezy.
And ourselves as well, we have difficult times as well, but aren't the most valuable learning experiences the tough ones? That just because a day is difficult doesn't mean that no learning happened. We learned something, and it's usually the sort of learning about trust and connections and value. I had this day, oh, many years ago. I had been blogging a while, and I was a prolific writer. And I got up one morning and I don't know what happened. Oh, I do remember. I think a jam jar fell on the floor. One of my children dropped a jam jar and the glass went everywhere. And I was tired and I just lost it. And everyone cried and, oh, I didn't handle it well at all. And then I sat down later on and I said to my daughter, who am I to share about unschooling? I haven't got it right. All I've been writing about is a big lie. All my blog, it's a lie. I'm going to delete it. And she said, Mom, stop, stop. She said, all what you have written was true when you wrote it. Today is a different day. Tomorrow will be different. And we ended up going out, I think, to a cafe. I just gathered the kids and said, we're going out. We're going to do something nice together. And we went and had hot chocolates. It must have been winter. And we restored our relationship and our connections. And I realized jam jars are broken on the floor. That's unimportant. What is important is my kids and their feelings. And I should have just got down on the floor and helped them pick it up and just said something like, I made a mistake last week. Do you remember how I made a mess of blah, 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 but just let it go. Everybody makes mistakes. But I was thinking in the back of my mind, and this always used to happen, well, for a while, that when we did something nice on a difficult day, whether it was somebody had thrown a jam jar on the floor by mistake, or whether it was somebody was arguing about what they wanted to do and they dug their heels in and wouldn't do what I thought they should do, I always ended up putting everything aside and concentrating on the relationship. And we always went off and did something enjoyable together, which I think is that's what we should be doing. It was the relationship that was damaged. We had to repair it. But at the back of my mind, it was always, you're giving in. You should make them do this. You should teach them a lesson about being more careful. You should have stood there and watched them until they'd cleaned up that jam. You should have made them do that maths they weren't interested in because they've got to learn. And I never did. But it's those echoes of former ideas that come to plague you in the moment when it's difficult. Some days are difficult. It's just picking yourself up again, repairing the damage and moving forward and thinking, we learned something today. I learned something about myself. My kids learned something. It wasn't what we intended to learn, but what we learned was more valuable than if the day had gone perfectly.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you bringing this back to that piece, Sue, because I think it's so important. The thing about the jam and what you just said about, I should have stood there and made sure they cleaned it up. And I got thinking about how I think here, I don't know, it's almost the person who spilled it isn't the person there's almost a sense that like that person is feeling kind of overwhelmed, or maybe they spilled it because they were in a rush, or I don't know what. But I almost think that in a more like supportive environment, I don't mean than you, I just mean that you had this idea in your mind that I think many of us have, is like, if they spill it, they need to learn a lesson to clean it up. And it's almost like the person who spills it, it's almost like everybody else rushes to help. And I see that intuitively, even in public. If somebody spills something, people don't stand around and be like, okay, you need to mop that up. There's something intuitive, isn't there, where people just kind of come and help. And there's almost a sense of like, I don't want to say that the person who spilled it shouldn't have to clean it up, but there's something there that everybody else kind of feels like, okay, the person has already, maybe they're in a rush, or maybe they're frustrated, or maybe now they're embarrassed, or maybe they've lost what they had, they just had a drink and now it's gone. I don't know. and it's almost like other people actually want to come and clean it up. Anyway, that was a little bit of an aside, but I was just thinking, like, in a more naturally supportive environment than these rules that we have in our head, I just find that tends to be more the case. But just to jog back to this idea of hard days, I as you've both been talking, I've been thinking about like the different kinds of hard days, because I think it's important to think about this. And so, of course, there are the really difficult things that happen in life, the illnesses, the deaths, the pet loss, the injuries, just really difficult things that happen. And then you've both described too periods of time that, the kid just isn't having a great day, because that's just part of life, or maybe the parent isn't having a good day. And then I also think of a couple of other ways to think about it. Like, you might have days where there are just things going on that are very disruptive. Like, we had to have an excavation into our basement the last week. And that was just on the heels of like a month or two ago when we had an oil leak in our basement, and we had all kinds of companies in doing different things. And it's hard to, those practical things happen too, don't they? Or natural disasters happen, storms. And I mean, Sue, you had whole periods of time with the threat of bushfires. And those days are different when you have something happening, whether it's a big repair job or something as serious as a potential natural disaster. I mean, that changes the energy of your day. But there's another kind of hard day that I just wanted to talk about, and it's not necessarily hard in a bad way, but I'm just reading, and this is a quote I've read from somebody else, and I can't quite remember where it originally came from. But described as your favorite Saturdays or a day in the summer filled with potential for daydreams, explorations, and discovery. And yes, but also I think it's important to say that with unschooling or like self-directed learning, kids are often in the middle of projects or goals that they have that aren't actually that fun to complete. So I think even when learning is self-directed, it can still be a hard day. Maybe a child is working on a piece of art that's really hard, or they're working on a physical challenge, or a piece of writing. Sue, you had lots of people in your house that did is it NaNoWriMo, the November? Yeah. And I'm sure there were the days that weren't just like daydreaming. They were trying to meet a goal. And like, I would even say that, people I think really misunderstand video gaming, but when people are gaming and they are working really hard to beat a level or to meet a challenge, it can actually be a very frustrating experience. So I think my argument a little bit with that way of looking at it, kind of potential daydreams, it's more than just dreaming. There is actual goal setting, and it can be frustrating, and it can be complex, and it can be really hard work. So I just wanted to put that in there too, because unschooling it's not just, there's a myth about lazy parenting, but there can also be a myth about lazy kids. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, not always the case.
I guess one other thing I'll just quickly add too. Yeah. I'm trying to think if we're probably experiencing this a little bit right now, but I know we've had it before too, where hard days here have looked like maybe almost the opposite of having projects and different things on the go, where the kids are maybe in between knowing what to do and feeling really bored, and or having trouble. Last summer actually ran into with my one kiddo, going really long stretches without seeing friends, not no friends, but like the friends that their closest friends, they didn't get to see because summer was just so busy with, people on camping trips, and the one, like their friend's mom working more and stuff, it was harder to get together. So those can be really hard moments too. And that, yeah, the kids being bored and not knowing what to do, um, maybe feeling uninspired, and then as the parent, you're strewing all these things and you're doing all these invitations and nothing seems to really be, and they're just kind of in a lull almost. Those can be the hard days too. And I know for myself, moments where I start to go, oh no, what am I not doing? But I think that's part of it. And those have kind of come and go for us.
Well, and that is a skill in and of itself, it's that builds a degree of resilience. And
Yeah.
like, that's not a pleasant feeling. We know that even as an adult, when you kind of, the word I like, being at loose ends, is the way you would like to start a new project, but you don't really know, or maybe you start it and it's not really what you want, but you don't, like, that's not a great, I think that feeling of being in between a decision, like of just not being able to decide, is really hard.
Yeah.
School kids don't have that much of that, because there's always something, they're always being told what the next thing is. So that skill of like sitting with yourself. And I think, Ashley, I think we talked about this maybe with Lindsay a little bit about boredom, and how as parents we can be supportive still. I'm not really of the mind of like, that's a whole topic, I think, boredom, but I'm not a fan of like, of almost being angry because kids are bored, or being, I think sometimes it is helpful to be supportive. But even in that, you can recognize that is a skill that they're learning, to kind of be in their own company when it doesn't feel very comfortable.
Yeah. And actually, if I can add, with what you just said, what I ended up doing was getting curious about where this boredom was coming from. And I'm just thinking this might be relevant to other families, as I'm noticing it was my younger one who was experiencing it this time. And I think with the ages and just where both my kids are, my older kiddo is kind of moving out of like doing the young type of imaginary play and games as often as they used to do. And that was very like gradual. So I didn't notice it right away. Or maybe I noticed it, but I didn't connect it to why my younger one was feeling bored more often, and probably also missing seeing friends more often too, because the older sibling, had some shifts and changes with just getting older, and the play didn't totally stop, but it was decreasing quite a bit. Or, like they'd get into lots of play for a couple of days, but then the older one would go off and do their own thing a lot more, and my younger one was around. So I think about like just kind of, again, slowing down and getting curious to really see what's going on. But also, like what you said, it's helpful to remember about, the positive things that are coming from those experiences as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is that whole developmental thing, that when kids are transitioning from one phase of childhood to another, I've heard other parents say that too. I remember somebody saying to me, nothing to do with unschooling, it was just a parent, what happens when kids don't feel like playing with their toys anymore?
Yeah.
Like what are they supposed to be doing? Because there is this weird sort of,
it's almost like transitioning into finding more projects, or I'm trying to think of other, it's not just projects, it's not always projects, right? But maybe different group activities, or trying some structured things, and thinking more stuff out of the home and stuff might be more, they didn't need as much of that before when they were younger and they were just playing together lots. Like the days were filled with play, and things have kind of shifted a bit. And, what does that look like? And bit of a transition there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm just looking down here. So Hayley talks about exploring their interests. Unschooling looks like lots of freedom, with our children choosing how they spend their time, exploring their interests, and learning in ways that feel right for them. Okay, I'm going to jog down a little bit here. She has a paragraph. There's no natural hierarchy of learning tools, with teachers and textbooks at one end and video games and chatting at the other. No way of knowing what will spark our children's curiosity or cement their understanding, although we can make some pretty good guesses. So I just wanted to talk for a minute about not judging what our kids' interests are, because I think that if our kids are interested in things that sound impressive to other people, then that feels easier. Even us as adults. My daughter and I are watching a couple of reality TV shows, and my mother-in-law watches them at the same time, and then we do a phone call after and we debrief about the characters. And I mean, they're not horrible, but one is pretty cheesy, would be considered kind of, I wouldn't say trashy, but not, it would be maybe what Charlotte Mason would call twaddle if she was ranking reality TV shows. But I don't think anyone else can really understand what somebody else is getting out of something. So for me, because I'm so fascinated by human behavior, I just find it fascinating to watch the dynamics, and somebody else might say, oh, there's a lot of like sexist comments in that, or it's very materialistic, or and like, I know that. I can see that. But it doesn't take away the other pieces of it for me. And even those pieces, the materialistic pieces, the sexist pieces, I find myself curious about it. And so sometimes you can actually do some really interesting learning by being interested in something that somebody else would consider low quality or not very important. And then other times, maybe people are watching it because they need something a little bit less intellectual. Like, for me, it actually is intellectually stimulating, but someone else might watch it and not find it that way, but they might still enjoy it because they just wanted to unwind, which is completely fine. So I find that, like, let's say video games, if people are talking about Minecraft, people can accept that more than if people are playing like Grand Theft Auto, just as an example. Right. And so I think that this idea of kids having different interests I think there's a lot of work in that for parents, not just their own work, but also external opinion about what their kids are interested in and what they are or aren't doing with their days. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me just think about a thought I've had before really around video games that I think is connected a bit to what you're saying. And I remember talking to my husband about it once, and both of them, my oldest kiddo is more so, I would say, into video games, spends more time playing video games than my other kiddo. And throughout the day would just mention to us, different things that are happening. I don't know, different levels that they reach or different goals that they've met, different things that they're working on or building or whatnot. And, sometimes I would find it interesting. Other times I have no idea what they're talking about, but I can see, like you were describing before, their face lights up and they're interested and they're going on and on about it. So I'm tuned in and I'm curious about like why it's so interesting to them and stuff. And I want to know what they've been doing and whatnot. But I noticed that, I don't know why I thought this at one point, but I kind of mentioned it to my husband, how, say he'd be off at work for the day and come home and, looking to kind of reconnect with the kids and, what's everybody been up to and how was your day sort of thing. But I noticed, or at least maybe I was just curious if he had, ever specifically asked, like, how's, whatever the video game may be at the time, whether it's Minecraft, Fortnite, whatever it was, how's that going? Like I never heard any time where he specifically asked about that. And I had this thought of, if it were a sport, if dad hadn't missed a hockey game or a basketball game or practice or something, I feel like, and I wasn't coming at my husband kind of accusing him, but in our world, like in our society, it seems much more like parents are like on top of like trying to make it to all the games, talking about, how's practice going, understanding if a kid is frustrated if the game didn't go well when it's hockey, but not when it's a video game, kind of that idea.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just mentioned it because it did make me think that, because to my kiddo, the video game is just as important as a hockey game would be, for example. Or, I mean, I'm just, at the time I thought of sports, but it could apply to, I'm sure, like someone who's working hard at learning to play a musical instrument. Parents might be a little bit more of, well, how's that going? Anyway, I just had that thought, but it made me think kind of about like that. And I think it's kind of how we grow up and, you know, what other people are talking about around us too. But I noticed, because my kiddo was talking about video games all the time, that I'm like, this matters a lot and it's really important. And I think it's very important that we show to them that it matters to us as well, like we would if it were something else.
I always think about video games like playing chess. Now, if our children, I had this set of three, I think, Chess for Children books, a set of them when they were young. And it was my hidden desire that my kids would read these books and become chess champions. And then I could, as we were saying, some things are impressive. Oh, my child plays chess. And of course, they weren't interested, and they never did take the books off the shelf and learn chess. But video games, had a new thought the other day. I was at a loose end, and I thought I haven't played a video game for a long time, and I just wanted one on my iPad, and I chose one that it was more than a puzzle. Sometimes I had to be quick. I like the puzzle games, like a jigsaw, or not a jigsaw version of a video game, where you can take your time and think about it and solve the problem, and then move on to the next stage. And I thought, no, I'm going to do something different. I had to aim properly, and there was enemies, and I kept losing my life. And at one point, I thought, oh, this is absolutely stupid. I'm wasting my time here. This is a silly game. Why am I sitting here? And I analyzed it a bit more, and I thought the reason I'm calling it stupid is because I'm not good at it, because it's making me feel stupid because I don't have the skills. So the question is, do I can persist and get better at it and start to enjoy the game, or do I just say, no, put my hands in the air and say, it's not for me? Well, I persisted and I got better at it. And it was this sense of satisfaction that I'd given myself a challenge and I'd move forward. But the problem is now I've got to a level where I'm stuck and I can't get past it. And I keep coming back and having a few more attempts, and it's getting frustrating. But the good thing, I think of you with this, Erin, is that one evening on Sunday when my son came to dinner, I passed him my iPad and I said, I can't get through this level. Can you do it for me? And I used to have this idea that we had to do everything for ourselves. There was no collaboration. But I think that's wrong, that we help each other. We work together. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time to get through it himself, but I could see his mind ticking over, and he was saying, well, look, if we try this and if we try that, and he got really into it. And then we had to sit down for dinner and we had to put the iPad away. But I thought that was a real connecting moment as well, that we connected over this video game, and that his passion also made me feel, wow, I want to continue doing this. But it's multifaceted, that video games, you can just do them for enjoyment, but there's so many skills involved with it, a lot to do with perseverance and hard work and setting challenges. But do we value the challenge? And if it was chess, a parent would probably say, yes, it's valuable. It's a video game? No. But how many of us are willing to sit down and enter that world with our child and to see it from their eyes and to share it? I don't know if we've gone off topic here, Erin. I just run with ideas and stories, and then I think, oh my goodness, I'm dominating in
No.
the conversation, but in a direction that where we weren't intending to head. But I suppose that comes under exploring interests and also parents as partners.
Yeah. I was going to say, I actually think it's perfect. And also because I was just going to say a little bit, very little bit about, Hayley has a section on following joy, because of course we're going to link her post anyway. And yes, about parents as partners, but the piece about, following joy, like you're talking about how chess can be kind of that would be an impressive thing. And I think about that, like, let's say that somebody asked a parent what their child was reading, and their child said I don't know, their child was reading classical poetry or something, and somebody else said, oh, my kid's really into Captain Underpants or something like that. And there's this value, isn't there, but the joy, like, here's the thing. We don't know. I think a lot of these books that are not considered as, I don't know, highbrow or whatever, they have a different level of genius in them. And just because we don't understand something, I think that this comes down to Hayley's last point in her definition of unschooling around trusting our children and trusting their joy, right? So we're following our children's joy, but we're also trusting their joy. And anyway, that's just kind of what I wanted to say about joy. But Sue, the piece that you said, the parents as partners, I think there's so many interesting things we could say about that. And what I liked about your story with your son, I mean, it's kind of like children as partners as well, where, you're working together and you're valuing somebody by asking their opinion or asking for their help. I think when we ask for help, we're actually valuing that person might have skill, maybe just energy, fresh eyes that we don't have in the moment. And so I feel like parents as partners, yes, but also just family members as partners. Yeah.
And also, we all have, even within a family, we all have individual skills and talents, and that when we pool them together, we can go further.
Mm-hmm.
So that to value somebody's unique talent within the family, instead of trying to make everybody the same, but we're going to work on this, and you have we want to work on this together. You have the talent for writing, and I can see this other child has a talent for drawing, and this other child, to invite, not to force them. But we have done so many projects as a family together where everybody's individual talents have naturally come together because they have been valued. That it's good to feel needed and good to feel that we're valued and that we have something to offer. And so that collaboration, my son, I just the other day when I gave him my iPad and his eyes just lit up, he can help me with this. Not that he got through the level, I'm going to have to give it to him again, but he has skills I don't have. And he was trying to impart his knowledge with me, but we've done bigger things than playing a video game. It's universal, isn't it? That we all work together. I often think about how this an initial desire to make sure our children have all these skills, like a foundational level of skills. They must know this, they must know that, they must know this. But while we're doing that, there's no time to let a child be who they are with their individual skills. So we never work alone in life. Nobody works alone. That life is about getting a job. It's working with other people and contributing your particular talent. Nobody expects somebody who's going to get a job to know everything. They have a niche. They have some particular talent, and we go looking for a particular type of job. And then within that, there's people that are connected together where you're good at directing, you're good at designing, you're good at following orders. We need somebody to do this, and we all work together. But in general education, we're all the same. And I know that there's been lots written about this, about how uh, we're turning out people like a factory. But I think that unschooling in particular, it it is honoring who people are and actually helping our kids in later life to know what they want, what they're good at, what their desires are, and to find their place in the world rather than just sort of being wishy-washy about everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, the idea of parents as partners, like when you're talking about jobs, Sue, it makes me think about even the process of getting a job and how we could partner with our kids. Like I'm thinking about developing a resume, and I'm just thinking of some of the different things that I did with my kids, like brainstorming about who might write them a letter of reference. And you know, sometimes my kids have done things, well, almost with each of them, they had done things that they didn't see how that could be relevant to a job. And so, you know, just having that conversation with them and kind of boosting their confidence, encouraging if there maybe was a skill or a certification that they needed to have before applying for a job, supporting them and figuring that out. So that's just something that came to mind for me about the job thing, is that I feel like a lot of the criticism around unschooling, honestly, around homeschooling in general, often is this idea that, well, yeah, but the real world, they'll have to, you know, they'll have to figure it out. They won't be able to cut it. But we don't live, you know, back to this excavation thing at our house. Like my husband has managed all the communication with that, all the, like he, you know, we're not here doing all the things all alone. You know, even outside of a couple, we can ask neighbors for help. We can go on YouTube and even get information from strangers. Like we're not set free in the world, and we have no input from anybody else. And our kids aren't either. Yeah. Was there anything else around, like Hayley says, under this, parents as partners, Hayley says, so far we've talked a lot about children, and quite rightly, it's their lives after all, but our children aren't alone. Unschooling doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're right there with them. Despite how it's sometimes portrayed, unschooling isn't a rejection of parental responsibility. Far from it. As unschooling parents, we embrace our responsibility for our children, for ourselves, and for the world and people around us. So, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about that, but I think it was just worth reading that out loud. And I like that Hayley, so she talks about we embrace our responsibility for our children, for ourselves, and for the world and people around us, because it's not just about being responsible to our kids. It's also about partnering with them and helping them figure out how the world works. How do people feel when they maybe do things a certain way, or what are the expectations if we're in a certain setting? It's not just about it's not this self-centered life. You know, it's real life with all of those social expectations as well.
Yeah, I actually can, as you're saying that, it's making me think lately, I've really noticed how, and maybe it's as the kids get older and they get into certain situations where I think, oh, it can be real, like speaking of hard days, I can find it hard navigating all of that with them when, let's just say, if they did go to school, they'd be navigating a lot of that, not alone, but not with me all the time. Now, I don't want that. I love that I do get to navigate all of it with them, or a lot of it with them, not all of it. Um, but yeah, kids are figuring out their place out in the world, and they make mistakes and they say things, and you're all, you know, the unschooling parents often there, right there for it. And there's many moments, especially I'll just, you know, as my older ones in the tween stage, coming out of it really, you know, there's things that are said where I just go, oh, you know, like, but you are there partnering with them and talking about it afterwards, or even just leaving space for them to grow into the person that they are. But it's, yeah, you're very much helping them. Like that can be messy and that can feel quite hard from my perspective as the parent in the situation where, yeah, it's just, it gets a little bit tricky, but that's a big part of it is just being out wherever, right? Like in groups and social settings, at the library, at the grocery store, and they do things and you're right there.
Well, and you realize how much gray there is. That's
Yeah.
the thing that comes to mind for me is that, yeah, when you're navigating these settings and these situations, you realize that, oh, this is an interesting rule. It doesn't make that much sense. Or like, I'm just thinking about maybe being out somewhere and I don't know, kids sharing or taking turns or something like that. And it isn't as clear cut as you think it would be. And so you had mentioned, I think, one of you back about the idea of conversation, I think. And Hayley has a section here about, I think she calls it an ongoing conversation. Mm-hmm. And that is the benefit of this, is that these things are ongoing conversations and we can talk about some of the nuances. Like that, what did you think about that? That seemed like it wasn't really fair to, it's fair to these people, but then is it fair to these people? Or how do we even think about the word fair? Like there's so many things that we can talk about that I think it really develops, that ongoing conversation really develops critical thinking, because mm-hmm. they aren't just having to follow a rule to kind of keep a large group managed. They're navigating. I'm trying to think of an example, but I don't know.
Well, I think even just helping them understand where someone else is coming from.
Yeah.
Because that's hard. I did that the other day where I gave my own example of trying to do that with a friend and honestly just said, it's actually really hard for me, or I have to try really hard to put myself in their shoes. And, I said, but I'm trying hard because I think like I really want to be a good friend to this person. And I think that would help me do that if I could put myself really in their shoes. But when I really think about it, I find that really hard. And I just, maybe was kind of narrating that out loud for mm-hmm. them because it was an experience that I was having. But I find that that's a big part of what I'm doing, where I'm trying to help them, think of other people and where they're coming from, because it is easy for all of us to, we've talked about this before on the podcast, just come from our own perspective or what we mm-hmm. got from the experience, but acknowledging that that's, someone else could have a very different experience from the same situation. And that's often stuff that we're talking about after, and sometimes it's just short little things and other times it's longer conversations, but lots of times it's just, like you said, like asking those little questions kind of aloud and thinking it through a little bit together. And sometimes they don't say very much, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just planting the seed that there's different ways of thinking about things. Like something that came up to mind for me, which is kind of not a very deep conversation, but even just being places where you're not allowed to sit in a certain section unless you buy the food. Like maybe it's an outdoor event, but there's certain sections. If you buy the food at that venue, then you get to sit there. But if you bring your own food, you can't sit in there, whatever. Just stuff like that, just talking about that and how they feel about that is part of navigating the world. And it's so conversational. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, I'm aware of our time, and there are still some sections here, but I'm wondering if we might be able to fold some of them in pretty nicely to part 3, because I think part 3, so for our next conversation, it's kind of myth busting, right? So talking about some of the common misconceptions. So I have a feeling that we might be able to fold some of these other headings in, right? So Hayley has, let me just look here, that it's constantly evolving. She talks about peace and patience. I think something that will be important to talk about is really interesting stuff, actually. Nurturing responsibility. There's a piece about putting relationships first. And I wonder if we can just be conscious about looking at those and kind of inserting them into some of the misconceptions, because I have a feeling they'll fit.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What do you
And encourage everybody to go read the article as well, because as we were saying before we started recording, that Hayley has put so many links and quotes and things scattered through that it's like you read her words and then you can dive even deeper into it. It's like the gateway into other people's work and expanding on what she's already said. So even if we miss some of the points, we hope, I guess, that people will read Hayley's words for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that because we've said that there's a lot there, and there is, but I will say the way Hayley writes it, like it's a very comfortable read to go through too. So I think I think it's well worth going and checking out.
Yeah, she's got a lovely way of writing. Her voice is so easy to listen to, and yes.
Yeah.
So it's not like going and wading through like a textbook article or anything.
No.
It's like spending time with a friend and a friend saying, "Oh, really? Perhaps you'd like to go and explore this link or that link." It's a lovely article, and I'm really pleased that you invited me, Erin and Ashley, to join you today to discuss it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sue, for coming. I'm looking forward to actually doing part 3, because I think the misconceptions is a big topic, and so I think it'll be interesting to think that through and as Hayley said, bust some myths, hopefully. So. Yeah.
That could be a fun one.
I think so. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you for joining, Sue. And thank you, Ashley. Really good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
And this ends our conversation today. We hope you found it interesting and maybe helpful. If you'd like to connect further or see additional content, Hayley can be found on the web and on Instagram at Taking a Kinder Path. Erin can be found at Everlearning, and I, Ashley, can be found on Instagram at AshleyAsMama and at Storytime Shelves. We'd be very grateful if you'd share this conversation with anyone you think might appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.